All right, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast with Justin and Brandon. We're here to talk about everything that just happened at the Italian Grand Prix. What a race it was, a Charles Leclerc victory in Monza, a Ferrari home win. Brandon, as always, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here talking about the Italian Grand Prix. And man, what a weekend it was. And to see a Ferrari home win hold off like that, couldn't have asked for better.
It was maybe the best Italian Grand Prix we have seen in a while. Obviously, it's a very historic track, but it had been lacking in a little bit of action since Daniel Ricciardo got his win. Obviously, a little bit of finishing under the safety car controversy the past few years. But we've got a lot to talk about because this was a pretty awesome race. So let's jump right into it. What is your one-sentence rundown from the Italian Grand Prix?
It's got to be he wins in Monza, just like in 2019. Man, it was awesome to see Charles out there pulling off the one stop and just an incredible strategy call from Ferrari, which is not a sentence we're used to saying. But it was awesome. And yeah, I think both Ferrari drivers drove a great race, and even Carlos had a solid showing on that strategy, on the one-stop strategy too. So it was a great race. Charles Leclerc, just unbelievable. Most impressive drive of his career by far.
I agree that it was the most impressive drive of his career. Maybe it wasn't the most flashy drive, and the race was good, but it's not like an all-time classic we're going to remember forever. But just taking those tires that long, being able to hold off the McLarens. Obviously, he got ahead of Lando Norris at the beginning of the race, so it's not like it was a complete fluke. He was kind of hanging on to the McLarens. He was thereabouts for most of the Grand Prix. And that flows great into my one-sentence rundown, which is that Charles Leclerc would be a world champion with a competent car. Half of this is kind of a diss on Ferrari of like, your car looked so good at the beginning of the year, and then you had such a big dip in form that maybe had things been different for Ferrari, Charles Leclerc could have had a shot at the championship this year. And now that they've fixed their upgrades, we're once again seeing that Charles Leclerc is one of the best drivers on the grid. He had an incredible weekend last time out at Zandvoort, and then he does this, winning at Monaco and Monza in the same season. So if Ferrari can somehow figure it out for the future, I'm not even going to write him off for 2025. I'm not writing anyone off for 2025. It's going to be an incredible season. But in my mind, Charles Leclerc is a top-tier driver on the grid. He's one of the best talents of this generation. And if he's given the right car with the right team, whether that's Ferrari or not, he could be a world champion in my mind.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, this just goes to show how talented he is, and how, honestly, I totally agree with you. I think had Ferrari not dropped off the face of the planet for like 5-6 races there in the middle of the season, Charles Leclerc would probably be up there with Lando Norris and Max Verstappen. And, it'd be really interesting to think about that. But, right now, in my mind, I'm getting excited about the prospect of a McLaren Ferrari, fight at the front for 2025. So obviously things probably will change between now and then, but it's a possibility. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Well, you have set us up perfect for our first question, which is, our Ferrari in the constructors fight? They're not that far behind McLaren. Obviously, Ferrari have a very strong driver lineup with Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz that have been very consistent throughout the year. Second place truly looks like it could be a big possibility. They scored the most points of any team this weekend, and Red Bull and Mercedes are continuing to kind of flounder. McLaren are continuing to leave points on the table. We will talk about that more in a little bit. But are Ferrari getting back into the constructors fight?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a 2-horse race between McLaren and Ferrari. I mean, I think Ferrari's, 31 points behind McLaren?
Something like that. Sounds right to me.
I mean, that's what McLaren's gap to Red Bull was going into this weekend. And everybody's talking about them taking the lead, And so, I mean, yeah, I think it's a 2-horse race. I think Ferrari's definitely in it, especially if they can perform well at tracks they have in the past. I'm thinking about Singapore, Carlos winning there last year. So if they can perform well at tracks at the end of this season, then I think it's McLaren and Ferrari.
Okay, this is a little crazy. I don't want to go too overboard, but we just saw Charles Leclerc win here at Monza. We've got Baku coming up. Weird place in the calendar, but that's a Charles Leclerc track. Okay, we've got Singapore coming up. We've seen Charles Leclerc and Ferrari do well there. We've got Coda. We've seen Charles Leclerc with our own eyes perform well there. We've got Vegas. We've seen Charles Leclerc perform there. We've got Mexico. We've seen Charles perform there. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but he's been so consistent that he's not that far out of it. He's under less than 100 points to Max Verstappen as well. So all these tracks that we've seen Ferrari perform well at, we've seen Charles perform well at, are coming up. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, and you can easily say they're in the constructors. But the driver is Charles Leclerc. Call me crazy, but I could see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically what you're saying is that you're predicting Charles Leclerc to win every single race for the rest of the season.
I'm not predicting that, but if he does win the world title and he wins every single race here on out, then this clip could very well go viral, and I'm going to be posting it on my personal social medias anywhere I can. I'll even put it on MySpace and see if anyone's still on there to see it. But I think with those tracks being so strong for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, they have to still be in the constructors fight. I think that is what that comes down to. Unfortunately, there's probably not enough time, and the gap is probably too big for Charles Leclerc to be back in the Drivers' Championship. He's mathematically still in it. There is still a possibility. There's a lot of tracks coming up that Charles is good at, but probably no Drivers' Championship. But in my mind, constructors fight is surely on.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible he finishes second in the Drivers' Championship for sure. I don't know behind who, yet to be seen, but I think it's definitely possible. And so it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the season plays out. Like you said, there's a lot of tracks that he and Ferrari have performed well at in the past. So it's all to play for.
It is absolutely all to play for. We'll just have to wait and see on that one. Let's talk about a team who are just set on giving away these championships. Freaking McLaren. They have frustrated me to no end this weekend. Are they just giving away these championships? It looks like they have no desire to help Lando Norris win the Drivers' Championship. They had these papaya rules in place that let Oscar Piastri just send one up the inside at the first chicane, which is great. Awesome move by Oscar. Kept it clean. Lando is super annoyed about it after the race. I'm seeing a whole bunch of stuff from the Lando Norris fan base online that is just absolutely bashing Oscar Piastri. But it's not Oscar's fault. If the team said they could race and Oscar could do it clean and there was no contact, that's the way that it went. And we saw Lando Norris make a couple mistakes, and then McLaren just handed Ferrari the race on a silver platter by just saying, we'll give you track position, we'll do the two-stop, you can have 18 seconds ahead of you as well as Carlos Sainz in between us, and we'll just see what happens. That gap was never going to get closed down. And then at the end, when it was clear that Oscar wasn't going to make it, you go ahead and make the switch between the drivers. That's now 10 points that Lando Norris has lost over the course of this season by not switching with Oscar Piastri. What are McLaren doing right now?
I don't know. It's really confusing. I don't get it. Especially at the very least, the call, what you just mentioned at the end of the race, switch them, because if Lando has any shot at the Drivers' Championship, it's these extra points, these 2-3 points, these fastest lap points that are going to make all the difference. You can't keep counting on Max Verstappen to finish P6. I know Red Bull doesn't look great right now, but as we have seen time and time again over the last 3 years, Red Bull and Max Verstappen, they know how to bounce back after a bad weekend. So, I hate to say it, but it's possible that Red Bull comes back next weekend and can win a race. They're not completely out of this. We have to remember that they're still leading both championships. So if the season were to end today, they would win. So I think if you're McLaren and you're Zach Brown, you gotta kind of have that mindset of like, we're not winning yet. It looks like we might, but you're not there yet. So I don't know. I don't get it. I think, whatever, let them race. If Oscar gets it in the first lap, let them duke it out. But if he doesn't, then, let Lando take the win, and I don't know. It just, they're racing like they have nothing to lose when they have everything to lose.
it truly is their titles to lose. You're totally right about that. As a Formula One fan who is just here for the entertainment of it, that Oscar Piastri move was great. That was awesome to see. It was an incredible overtake around the outside. Absolutely caught Lando Norris napping. You could see in the way that Lando Norris almost bended when Oscar Piastri went around the outside of him. Incredible move. For the sake of both titles, absolutely unacceptable. You have to, as the team, find a way to make sure that doesn't happen. Because not only did you give away Lando Norris getting 26 points when Red Bull was clearly the fourth fastest team this weekend, which isn't going to be happening forever. You got to remember, Red Bull is not a midfield car. We've seen all top 4 teams win races this season, and it's Max Verstappen and Red Bull. You can't count on them not winning any more races this year. That's truly a possibility. We saw Helmut Marko say they're going to be competitive again from Coda onwards, which is still 5 races to end the season. And so Red Bull aren't just going to go out of this lying down and let you have it. So you gave away constructors points. You gave away drivers championship points. And yes, I'm happy for the entertainment. Oscar looked to be the faster driver on race day. He made less mistakes as well. But you're going to have to make Oscar upset a little bit if you're going to fully back Lando for a title. I know they're both great drivers. They both could be number 1 drivers on their own team. And McLaren doesn't want to say that there's a specific number 1 and number 2 drivers. But you just have to look at the facts, how they are. Oscar Piastri's still 40-something points behind Lando Norris. I know he's mathematically still in it. He's not going to win the driver's title this year. Lando Norris has a chance to win the driver's title this year. So at some point, your papaya rules have to stop being these vague, weird, random set of rules that no one really knows what they are to Lando is 1, Oscar is 2. We're going to switch positions if we have to. Race, keep it clean. If it's not going to have an outcome on the championship, yes, race, but maximize points in both titles. And that's not what the team did this weekend.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. And I mean, I saw Will Buxton talking about it in an interview, and he was really angry about it. And he brought up an interesting point, which maybe Oscar has something in his contract that prevents him from being referred to as the number 2 driver or having that standing in the team, which I don't know if that's actually true or how feasible that is to work into a Formula One driver's contract. But I don't know. It just seems like there's something going on that nobody understands, especially McLaren. So I don't know. It's just strange. It's very strange.
Well, Oscar's manager is Mark Webber. And so if there was any former driver who's going to make sure that his young talent would not be referred to as the number 2 driver, it would be Mr. Multi-21 himself, Mark Webber. So it's definitely a possibility. But also there's a whole bunch of stuff online just making fun of Will Buxton for the absolute British bias that he had in that rant. And yes, some was there, but most of what he said was completely valid. McLaren have to figure it out if they want to win the championship. Let's talk about Red Bull. We have to. This was clearly their worst race of the weekend, of the entire season. They clearly were the 4th fastest car. They had no pace in qualifying. They had no pace in the race. They did a strange strategy where they did hard, medium, gave them no chance to do the one stop. Is there really any chance for them to win the Constructors' Championship at this point?
The way I see it, probably not. They're only 8. Their lead is cut down to 8 points now in the Constructors' Championship. And that strategy call when they went in for the first pit stop and put hards on again, you lock yourself into a 2-stop strategy, 20 laps into the race. That doesn't make any sense at all from a strategy standpoint. If you're going to run the mediums at some point during the race, you might as well do it during the second stint so you have the opportunity to go to the end. I mean, maybe not on mediums, but you have the opportunity to be flexible with your strategy. I don't know. That strategy call to me was wild. I think if they keep making decisions like that, then the constructors is out the window. And Helmut Marko did say that they're going to be competitive from Coda on, but is that enough time to take the lead again? Because I'm assuming by Coda, when that rolls around, that they probably will not be leading Constructors' Championship, but we'll see.
In all fairness, when they made that hard stop, there was no way for them to know that some teams were going to try the one stop. Everyone it still looked like it was going to be a 2-stop at that point. And because they didn't really take the hards long. That would have been a really long stint on the mediums. But you even saw from Max's onboard when he was leaving that pit stop, he asked the team, what am I supposed to do in this stint? Like, what's the plan here, guys? He like took his hands off the steering wheel and was like, what the heck? Like, Max was visibly upset by that strategy call. And so to have a bad car, to make a bad strategy call, it's just a rough weekend from Red Bull. Getting a P6 for Max, I guess, was maximizing the result and minimizing the damage, especially with Lando coming home in third place. But on the spot, right now, scale of 1 to 10, do you think Max Verstappen will win the Drivers' Championship? He leads by 62 points. Lando Norris took another 8 points out. How confident are you, 1 to 10, that Max Verstappen wins the Drivers' Championship this year?
Like 6. 6. I don't know. I think it's a real possibility for Lando to win. If Lando takes 8 points out of Max every single race to the end of the year, on average, Lando would win. And that's, he would win by like a point or two. But that's still a possibility. And that's not even factoring in like sprint races and things like that. So I think it's a real possibility. I don't know. It's going to be really, really interesting to see. We're getting to the point where we're going to start figuring out if Max has it in him to hang on to this Drivers' Championship. And it would be absolutely insane if Lando won or Charles won. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's more likely than not that Max wins, but only slightly.
That is lower than I was going to say. I was ready to say like an 8. I still think the lead is pretty big. But then I kind of thought about sprint races. There's 3 left. And so even if it's like a P2, P4, it's a couple more points. Lando chips away. Doesn't have to do as much in the main race. The real winner in this is us, because when we go to Austin, a champion won't be crowned, which hasn't happened yet in our visit. So there will actually be so much at stake that weekend, which makes me super excited. But at this point of the season, there was never a thought in our mind that we would say it's not a 10 for Max Verstappen to win the championship. After the first race, I almost thought he'd have it wrapped up by now. And so this is an incredible season of Formula One. I know the gap is still massive, but it is going to come down to the wire. It might even come down to Abu Dhabi at the end of the year. So I am pumped to see how this season of Formula One turns out.
Man, how fitting would it be if it came down to Abu Dhabi again?
Well, at least Michael Massey isn't still in charge, so might be a little less controversy this time. Brandon, who is your podium pusher of the weekend this time out in Monza?
Okay, I wanted to highlight 2 drivers here.
Double podium pusher alert. Ayo.
My first one ever. But I got to go with Alex Albon. Alex, he had a great qualifying performance. He's qualified in Q3. He's had an appearance in Q3 every single time he's raced at Monza. And he followed that up with a strong drive in the race to pick up, a couple good points for Williams, where points are, kind of hard to come by. And his brand new teammate, Franco Colapinto, also drove a pretty good race, finished in P12. That's already an upgrade from Logan Sargent, unfortunately.
Nah, he's technically still behind Logan in the driver's standings. He's 21st right now. Logan is technically still P20. So hasn't passed him yet.
I think that's the championship. That's the battle we all need to be paying attention to.
The real battle is Valtteri Bottas at 22nd place for the 20 Drivers' Championship.
Oh, that's crazy. Maybe Valtteri would do better if he rode his bike around the circuits. But my second podium pusher of the weekend is Carlos Sainz. He very nearly finished on the podium on his birthday, which is cool. And he also made the one-stop work very well. It was a great race from him, something that he should definitely be proud of. Helped Ferrari score the most points out of any team this weekend, cutting into the lead that McLaren and Red Bull have over them on the Constructors' Championship. So those are my 2 podium pushers of the weekend. First double podium pusher. But yeah, it was an awesome weekend for both of them.
Yeah, I think it was a great weekend for both those drivers as well. I think both Williams drivers, like you said, had really good weekends. And then Carlos Sainz as well. He wasn't that far off of Charles Leclerc, especially before the pit stops. He was pretty close to Charles, only a couple seconds behind. And then I think Carlos's pit lap was obviously different than Charles. I think, Carlos pitted later, and it was almost like he was saving his tires at the beginning of that stint and kind of fell away. and then wasn't able to catch back up on the end. But he played the team game very well to kind of slow up the McLarens. I think he played a big part in Charles Leclerc winning that race just by having that buffer between Oscar and Lando. So that was good to see from him. I'm gone for the other Ferrari driver as my podium pusher. It has to be Charles Leclerc. It cannot be anyone else. Like we said at the very beginning of the podcast, this was the best drive of his career. To get P2 off the line, to come back from being undercut, to make that two-stop work or that one-stop work. And if you look at the lap times, he was consistent. He never really had a fall off. And the commentators kept saying, like, oh, when these tires fall off a cliff, they really fall off. And another lap would go by, another lap would go by, another lap would go by. And Charles just didn't fall off. It was an incredible drive. Part of me was like, uh-oh, he's about to get disqualified. But he didn't. Praise the Lord for that. But it has to be Charles Leclerc. What a drive from him on home soil.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, as I was watching the end of the race, I was hearing what the commentators were saying, and I kept thinking, like, man, they're probably right. These tires are going to fall off. And then it was like, all right, 12 laps to go. Okay. 10 laps to go. Okay. 8, 6, 2 laps to go. I mean, once it was under 5, I was like, yeah, I don't think it's possible for him not to win anymore. And it was just crazy. Just seeing the crowd, watching the podium celebration. I mean, what an incredible atmosphere. And yeah, just an amazing drive by Charles.
Let's talk about someone who probably didn't have an amazing drive. Who do you have as your back marker of the weekend this time in Italy?
This might be a little controversial. They didn't have a terrible weekend, but they didn't meet my expectations, unfortunately. And maybe I'm just a little mad because they didn't help me out in my predictions, but I'm going with Mercedes. They seem to have good pace in practice. Qualifying didn't really go their way, though, and the race wasn't much better. They seemed like they were a step above Red Bull this weekend and have been maybe for a couple weekends now, but it doesn't seem like they can really compete up at the front. They can't take the fight to Ferrari, take the fight to McLaren if they don't qualify up there with them. It really feels like they don't have any room for error, and if they make a mistake in qualifying, the race is over. They make a mistake in the race, bad strategy call, a lockup. I mean, if you look at George's lockup into turn 1, I mean, that essentially made his race terrible. So I think Mercedes is kind of in a place where they don't have any room for error, and they're unfortunately making some mistakes. So
yeah, well, I think they're probably locked into 4th in the Constructors' Championship. If they had a perfect rest of the season, then maybe they could find a way to somehow get 3rd, but I don't really see that right now. It wasn't the worst weekend, like you said, but they definitely still left some points on the table, especially George Russell. If you look at his start, he probably had the best start of any of the drivers. It looked like he was going to come out of turn 1 in P3, maybe even P2 if he got lucky, and then ended up, running into the back of Oscar, losing a front wing end plate, and his race was pretty much ruined from there. And then Lewis Hamilton was kind of let down in qualifying, like you said, and then he had good race pace to finish ahead of the Red Bulls, but couldn't go any further because of the poor performance he had in qualifying. So yeah, just not a great weekend for Mercedes. I've gone for a team as my back marker as well, and it is Visa Cash App RB. That team looks pretty slow right now, just in general. They've tried to bring upgrades, and it feels like none of them have worked. That penalty that Daniel Ricciardo got on lap 1, I didn't necessarily agree with it. I mean, it's a lap 1 incident, and especially at Monza, we've seen drivers kind of squeeze going into chicanes and not get penalties, just get warnings before. So a little strange to me. And then Yuki Tsunoda got absolutely torpedoed by Nico Hülkenberg. So he'd had to retire on lap 7. And then Daniel Ricciardo comes in to serve his penalty, and the mechanic just touches the front wing out of habit. And so then he gets another 10 seconds added on. And so it's just a poor race from the RB drivers. I mean, Daniel had good pace, but couldn't do anything because the car isn't quick in a straight line. That's probably their biggest weakness. And then had that extra penalty added on as well. And so just a poor weekend from VCarb all around.
Yeah. It seems like it was kind of just a clumsy effort from all of them. I mean, you look at kind of mistakes across the board of, Daniel getting a 5-second penalty, mechanic, touches the car out of habit. That's a mistake. And then Yuki has to retire. It just seemed like they were kind of stumbling through the race, and unfortunate for the weekend because we do love Daniel and Yuki less than Daniel, but still a little bit.
No, you got to feel bad for Yuki at Monza. He has 2 DNSs, a DNF, and like a 15th place finish on his Monza record. So poor guy. This is just not a fun track for Yuki Tsunoda. Let's talk about our bold predictions for this weekend. What were your 2 predictions and how'd they go?
My 2 predictions didn't go well, but I said top 5 in the race will consist of both Mercedes, both McLarens, and a Red Bull. That didn't happen. Not even close. But oh well, that's okay. Second one is one team in the bottom 5 of the constructors will score points during the race. Also didn't happen, but it's okay. Actually, multiple teams did.
Exactly. So no point for you. No point.
I should have been more bold in my prediction. But yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, I got to manipulate it a little bit because I'm 99% sure I'm behind in points. So I got to find a way to stay in this championship somehow because I had a really poor weekend as well. My first bold prediction was that Ferrari would score the second most points as a team this weekend, and Papaya Rules made sure that didn't happen, and Ferrari scored the most points this weekend. And then my second bold prediction was that Lance Stroll would outqualify Fernando Alonso, and Lance Stroll looked like he was in peak 2023 form because he finished last on track, got eliminated in Q1. Just a horrible weekend all around. So maybe it's time for me to retire that prediction. But that was an absolutely poor weekend for me on predictions. The fans at DAP177 said that both Ferraris would DNF. Yeah, that didn't happen. A Ferrari won the race, so that's a no there. At Rafi LP says Verstappen takes pole. Not even close there as well. And at TrasXH says McLaren takes the constructors lead this race, which could have happened. They came very close. Should they have secured that 1-2, they likely would have taken the constructors championship lead. So we're all losing out because of Papaya Rules this weekend. And we went 0 for 7 on predictions once again.
Yeah, it's tough scenes out here, but it's okay. We always have next weekend on the predictions. Fortunately for us, there's a little bit less at stake than there are for the drivers. But yeah, we bounce back. We learn from our mistakes. We stop putting so much faith in Lance Stroll, and we move on.
Dang it. I just need to start picking Charles Leclerc pole, Charles Leclerc win. Just get it out there on all these tracks, and we'll see what happens. Brandon, before we leave these lovely people, what are your parting podium thoughts?
Man, it was just a feel-good story this weekend, and I really enjoyed watching the race, watching Charles win, watching the Tifosi just enjoy their home team take home the win. I mean, it was awesome. That's only how I can imagine that a Haas win at COTA would feel. So I'm looking forward to that maybe in the next, 50 years, 60 years, something like that. We'll see.
I have more faith in an Andretti home win before I see a Haas home win, but that's okay. If that were to happen, the track invasion in Austin would go absolutely crazy. My parting podium thought, and this just came to me, is that I think I enjoyed this year more than 2021. I'll say it. There's a championship fight between more than 2 teams. There's a drivers' championship fight between drivers and different teams that aren't crashing every single weekend. We actually get to see racing. We have a car that seems to be slowing down, cars that seem to be speeding up. We don't know the pecking order every weekend. There's number 2 drivers helping more than they should, number 2 drivers not being there. I think it's better than 2021. I'm having a great time watching it, and I can't wait to see how this season ends.
Yeah, me too. 2021, looking back on it, it just felt tense, and this doesn't feel as tense. It feels competitive, which is a lot of fun to watch.
Absolutely. So fun. It might just be my favorite season of F1 yet. But for now, that is all we have got on the Italian Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast. As always, like, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review. Do all of the things you know to do on the platform you're listening to. We're super thankful for each and every one of you guys who watches, listens, subscribes, leave comments. Each one of those means the world to us, and we're super thankful. We will see you in the next one.
See ya.